Good morning. Oh, the microphone works. I know everyone's out there getting their directories and all that, and coffee, and all the required items of the morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Ritter. I've been here for a little over a year. My wife and I, we're actually in the directory. If you want to find, they're not page numbers. I was going to tell you what page number we're on, but we're right after the reads. So just the reads and all the rectors. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. Mick texted me earlier this week and said, my wife and I were on vacation. We went to Tennessee and North Carolina. We got snowed on one day, beautiful mountains and all this. And Mick texted and said, hey, you going to be back on Sunday? And I should have said, no. I should have found some reason to stay. But that had been dishonest, so I didn't. I said, sure, which I should have known meant, hey, I have something for you to do Sunday morning. So he asked me to kind of fill in this class this morning. And it's tough because I haven't been in this class at all this semester. I know y'all have been going through, he gave me the title. He said that y'all been doing Church of Christ, This Is Us. Right? Is that, yes. What does that mean? Who we are, where we came from.
He's focused a lot, or at least to me, on the two sides, unity of the Church of Christ versus what is the identity of the Church of Christ.
Okay. I think that's a little more than I got from his text messages, so I'm already learning some things.
I may be reading too much of these lessons.
Excuse me, I'm a little congested this morning. Well, when I texted Mick back, I said, well, what do you want me to teach about? I thought maybe, he'd have I want you to talk about this. And he was like, well, here's our title, and so whatever you want to talk about. He mentioned, he actually threw out baptism. I was like, I don't think I want to come in as the one-time fill-in teacher and cover baptism. I was like, I'm in favor of it. I approve of it, but I just don't know that I'm quite prepared. But I had been teaching on 1 Timothy the first part of this semester in the other class out in the portables, out yonder. And we talked about elders and deacons. And so we're going to spend a little time this morning talking about that. Not that I'm qualified to talk about that either, but we'll see how it goes. And for those of you who've never been in a class, I've taught a couple classes so far here, and I guess they've gone okay because, like I said, Nick asked me to do this morning. Now, I don't know how far down the list of people he asked it was till he got to me. But I'll be honest, I'm a little intimidated by the auditorium thing because I try to do a lot of question and answer stuff. I try to do a lot of talking because I know that I don't know enough. I fully understand that I don't have all the answers and don't expect to. And I don't want to disappoint anyone. I don't necessarily think that we always are going to leave class with all the answers. When I did this 1 Timothy class before, one of the guys who was in there kept getting on to me because he goes, but you haven't answered anything. I was like, yeah, but we talked about stuff, and we looked at different issues, and we looked at the different perspectives and things. He goes, yeah, but you didn't give me a definite answer of how it's supposed to be. And I don't always think that I'm the right person to give the definite answer about how it's supposed to be. I think we look at the scripture, we try to understand what it said, what its purpose was, and figure out what is meant for us to do. So, now that I've said all that, and either have some of you really worried about this morning or some of you wanting to leave, we'll kind of get started. So, we're going to spend a lot of time in 1 Timothy, but we'll kind of jump around a little bit. But I want to read 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. And this is where Paul's talking to Timothy, or writing to Timothy in a church in Ephesus he starts talking about elders. And he says, here's a trustworthy saying, whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. What, in your mind, just as we get started, what is an overseer? What's the job of an overseer in the Church of Christ, if you will? or in the church in general? Boy, this is the part where some people try to answer. Yes, sir.
I look to them for spiritual help.
For spiritual help?
Yes.
Okay.
Specifically, directly, not limited to that, but that is the way I read it.
Okay. For spiritual help? Are they spiritual guidance of the church? Are they who we look to often for answers to some of our questions about different things that may give us questions, give us pause? I'm getting some nods, some questioning looks. That's okay too. Why do you think Paul calls this a noble task here? Is it a noble task? There's a couple elders in here. Y'all may not agree that it's a noble task. I don't know. Very noble. Why is that? Okay. Okay. That's not always an easy task, is it? There's a big job. You're concerned not just with people's lives and well-being here, but you're also concerned with their spiritual well-being, their spiritual life. And it's the whole church, the direction of the church, and that we stay scripturally sound. So it's a big job. And so Paul spends in a couple different passages sometimes looking at the qualifications, but I actually want to jump over real quick to 1 Peter. And in 1 Peter 5, verses 1 through 4, Peter says, "To the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's sufferings, who also will be shared in glory to be revealed. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those who entrust you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade." So, Peter mentions here that they're watching over the flock not because they must, but because they want to. Is that important? Very important. Why? I also think there's a mindset that comes with wanting it. And it becomes less of an obligation. I worked at a camp when I was in college, and there was a saying that was up on the wall by where because everyone had to go do dishes, right? You know, it's camp, so everyone had chores different days, and one day you got to do dishes, and there was a sign above of the dishes area that says, "You don't have to, you get to do dishes." And the whole idea of it being that it's a privilege to be able to do the dishes. It's a privilege to be able to serve other people. It's a privilege to be able to just be there and be around other Christians and all. And I think that applies to so many things. If you can flip your mindset on stuff to where it's a privilege to do it, and it's something that you get to do and not have to do, I think that really helps with the way you do it. And the zeal in which you approach it, and all of a sudden those tasks become less of a burden in some ways. Now, I say that knowing fully well I don't do that very well in many things. When I go to work and go to my job, there's a lot of things that I seem to have to do instead of get to do. Yesterday I had to mow the grass. I don't always think that I get to mow the grass. But Peter points out here that he wants it to be a choice, something that they're willing to do. He also mentions that it's a service. You know, we think sometimes as elders being this, I don't know if exalted positions too much, but it's pointed out over and over again, it's a service position. The elders are appointed to serve the congregation, to serve the church. And I think it's important we remember that as we kind of talk about what the qualifications and type of people and stuff that are chosen to be elders. So I want to flip back to 1 Timothy. I want to finish reading the 1 Timothy 3, 2 through 7. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him. He must do so in a manner worthy of full respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. He must also be a good reputation with outsiders, so that he will not fall into disgrace into the devil's trap. So, who wants to list out some of the qualifications that I just kind of mentioned there? This is where if I had a whiteboard, I could write them, but I don't have one, which is probably better because, as my wife will tell you, my handwriting's awful. So, good reputation for people outside the church. Why is that important? Why do I care what people outside the church think? Right? It's important what people outside the church think. As we went through 1 Timothy out of the class, one of the whole kind of guiding themes of 1 Timothy. So Paul's writing this church to Timothy as he's in Ephesus. So it's kind of a letter to Timothy and also to the church in Ephesus. And one of the whole themes of the whole book is be respectable. Be the kind of place that is respectable to the outside world so that you can pull people in. There were some things, not to go too much into it, there were some things going on at that church that were kind of getting a little wacky, a little wonky. That's a biblical technical term, wacky and wonky. And so Paul's writing this letter to kind of pull them back in, to say, hey, you need to have a respectable church, have a respectable congregation. What are some other qualifications that he mentions here? Able to teach. Okay? Something you lead, not something you run, something you lead. I like that. Why is it important that they're a leader as an elder? It is. And you think this is kind of going off my notes a little bit. You mentioned that they're not perfect. They do make mistakes. Do you think that's why there's supposed to be more than one of them? Do you think that's why there's supposed to be more than one of them? I don't know. This is me kind of going off, but I'm sorry. It helps having more than one because you could kind of discuss and understand the direction. Yes, sir.
I wanted to mention that it's Ritter.
Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, we could spend a whole Bible study going through the ways the church is like the household and how the elders in many ways are the head as the husbands. Yes, sir.
It's unreasonable to expect one person to have all of those traits.
True. Very true. What are some of the other qualifications that were listed here? Some of y'all may have had a little different one. The first one I read, sorry, not the first one. The first one is to be above reproach. We've talked about a little bit. My version here, which was the new NIV, not the NIV 84 I grew up with, but the new NIV, mine says faithful to his wife. Some of y'all says husband of but one wife or something like that. Is that right? Yes? No? Yeah. So that one's always kind of, it's a little personal to me. Just some of my backstory. The gentleman I call my dad is actually technically my stepdad. He and my mom were married, the summer after my 5th grade year. And he's one of the strongest Christians I know. A great example, a great teacher. And he is a deacon back at his home church, but he said he'll never be an elder because he was also previously married. And so this verse says something to him. So it's something I've always struggled with. And when I look at this verse, I struggle with it. Am I reading it the way because I want it to be that way, or am I reading it a certain way because that's the way God meant it to be? When it talks about husband of but one wife, the words there for husband and man and the word for wife and woman are the same word there. And so traditionally it was translated of husband of but one wife. Some of the newer versions, some of the newer translations say it's kind of the idea of a one-woman man, faithful to his wife. Why do you think it was important for Paul to mention this idea of a one-woman man or husband of but one wife?
That was the original.
And that was part of it. Part of it was the culture and stuff that Paul was writing to. Polygamy wasn't an uncommon thing. It was with the Jewish culture and all that, it was very common. And so that was something he was addressing here. Another thing that if you do some research, when it goes back to the idea of it being respectable, was having your leadership that didn't cheat on their wives, that was faithful to their wives. And so that was something that Paul was trying to convey, to make the church more respectable, to make specifically this church in Ephesus, but I think churches in general more respectable if their leadership was more faithful to their spouse. Because, and as we go back to the correlation between the households, if the man can be faithful to his spouse, how is he going to be faithful to the church? How is he going to be faithful to his duties? You know, as he talks about it with the family, you know, how an elder does his personal life is a reflection upon how he'll do his job often. How can he be expected to do his job well if he can't keep his personal life straight?
A bit more positive, and I appreciated that approach.
So one of my questions here that I've struggled with, for a person to be an elder, do they have to tick all these boxes?
No, they can't.
What was that? For a person to be an elder, do they have to meet all the qualifications that Paul lists here? So, and I think, to kind of pivot back here, I think they should have all the this is me speaking. I think they should have all the qualifications. Now, we could discuss though what these, because I think we'll have differing opinions on what some of these qualifications look like. But I think one of the things that we have to come back to is the desire and the willingness to do the job and to take on the task. But we all sin. Like, even elders sin. Like, it's going to happen. And it's the way we react to it and the way they react to it that becomes important. Yes, sir?
I kind of like to use the word.
So often you find they're already kind of doing the job. They're already that kind of person before they actually get the title. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out time-wise where we're going to go from here. We could spend a lot of time kind of going through and looking at each one of these, but I want to skip ahead to something that was kind of brought up a while ago. So, what if I'm not wanting to be an elder? Do I care about this list? Right? Do I care about this list if I don't want to be an elder? Yes? Why? Because we're supposed to be that way too? That's a tough list. Slow, self-controlled, slow to get angry. Those are sometimes tough things to do. So we look at these qualifications partially because that's the way we want to live. We want to be able to see them in others, right? Because when it comes often, and I haven't been at this congregation when it comes to elder selection, and each church kind of has a different way. But often when it comes up, that we turn to the church body to kind of say, hey, who are some people who could be elders? And so I think it's important for us to be for lack of a better phrase, a well-informed electorate on some of these things to understand these qualities that we want in an elder. Yes, sir.
I just want to say the beautiful thing about forgiveness and sin and everything is there's a lot of things that that's what they're called to.
It is. It's a tough standard, but I think it's a great point that we all stumble, but we all have that gift of grace and the forgiveness as Christians, and the ability to come back or to be forgiven. Yes, sir. Yeah, hey, we like lists. I think sometimes that's one of our greatest strengths and our greatest weaknesses as a church, is we like lists of things that we can tick off because it lets us know that what we're aiming for and what we're going for. I think here is a list of things to aim for, a list of qualities that are obviously good qualities to have, good qualities to see in ourselves, and good qualities to see in others. See, what happens is I walk away from my notes too long, and when I get back, I have to figure out where I was. And I'm sorry about the walking. I have a hard time staying in place. I was told one time I stood behind a podium, and I was told I did this the whole time, which was dancing in church, and I'm sorry for that. Please forgive me for that little thing right there. But I couldn't stand still. So I don't know if it's a nervous thing or what, but I tend to walk around and look at, sometimes get off my notes a little bit, and then I spend time filling time while I try to figure out where I'm going to go from here. I want to skip forward, though, to 1 Timothy chapter 5. I want to look at verses 17 through 20. The elders who direct the affairs of the church, who direct the affairs of the church well, are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. For Scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out grain, and the worker deserves his wages. Do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. But those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that the others may take warning. So are elders kind of held to a higher standard? Yes? No? Yes, sir. I think that's often true. One of the things I always find interesting is when people think about, especially people who are maybe from outside or whatever, think about church leadership and all, often they jump to the preacher, right? Because that's the guy who's up front, who's kind of the face of the congregation in many ways. But that's not really the way we're constructed, is it? That's not the way we're called to be. Yes, sir. I think that goes back to God's plan for the structure of the church, right? He didn't want there just to be one, charismatic person or one person to push their own agenda. He desired for this group of men to lead the church, to work as a group, scripturally based, to lead a church. And I think that shows some real, foresight and all. I know other denominations, other groups aren't structured that way. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, and she was talking about the word pastor. And often we hear the word pastor, it's, especially outside, Church of Christ, pastor is an elder. That's the way it was used in the Bible. Outside the Church of Christ, it's often the preacher, right? And I think one of the things that we do, I think, do well is try to remember that the pastor, the shepherd of the church, the shepherds of the church, not the shepherds of the church are the elders. They're the ones who are leading. They're the ones who are setting the direction and trying to shepherd the flock and shepherd the congregation. I can say all these things about the preacher because Mick isn't here today. That was a joke. Mick's great. And having a good preacher is great, and they can do many great and wonderful things. But we are called to be led by elders. One of the qualifications or qualities that we I'm trying to not use I'll use qualities that we didn't really touch on, was not a recent convert. Why is that important? Right. I mean, that goes, he's talking about, being able to discern false teaching, and having that experience and being a more experienced Christian helps you decipher some of that and understand some of the differences and some of the different teachings and all. I'm sorry. Her wonderful and perfect and awesome answer. She was talking about that beyond just the desire to be an elder, having the experience, having the groundedness and the background is maybe even more important than having the desire to be an elder. So I can desire to be a track star, but if I haven't spent the time learning and running and all of those things, it's not going to happen. And so having this background and having this experience in Christianity becomes maybe more important than desire. And I think all of it has to kind of come together. I think it's important that it's not just one thing or the other. They all come together and they all fit together.
That's why it's so important when you mentioned earlier.
One of the things I'm pausing for a second because we have about 1 minute to try to address all of this. I think it is important that they have and they meet all the qualifications. Now, one of the things that can often be discussed is how those different qualifications look. Because you say a man who'd been married previously and was remarried. I don't honestly know, and I accept that I can be wrong. I'm not sure that that's what he was meaning here. I think it's possible he was meaning someone who's faithful to his wife, not necessarily not remarried. And I know, now I've lost about half of you or more. But I think it's important. One of the things I always kind of try to reinforce, and we're running out of time, and I'm sorry to kind of end this way. I think it's important, us as a church and us as Christians, to be able to have conversations and even disagree and still love each other and still be a church and be a body and be together. And so I do want to leave with that. And I do want to say that I don't intend to be the expert on anything. So please disagree with me. I think that's okay. So, ma'am, did you have a... And that's a valid question. And I was supposed to end a minute ago, but now y'all have taken me down a road that needs more time. Yeah, I'll leave that for Mick next week.